On a stormy night, Adrian, the cold and powerful alpha heir, reunites unexpectedly with Evan, the Omega servant who once shared a forbidden bond with him. The tension between them sparks uncontrollably, and despite years of distance and heartbreak, they surrender to the pull of their fated connection. Neither of them knows that this single night will ignite a chain of secrets, love, and consequences, leading to a child the alpha doesn't yet know exists. The night was darker than usual. Heavy clouds swallowed the moon, and rain lashed against the windows of the alpha heir's mansion. Inside, the sound of thunder echoed through the marble halls as Adrian, the powerful alpha heir, returned from a business trip soaked and furious. He had built walls of steel around his heart, but the moment he saw Evan, the quiet Omega servant who once belonged to him, those walls began to crack. Evan stood frozen at the entrance, his hands trembling as he tried to take the alpha's coat, his scent betraying the rush of emotions he tried to hide. Years had passed since their last forbidden night, the night their world had fallen apart. But tonight, something stronger than pride pulled them back together. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. The storm outside mirrored the one inside the room. Wild, hungry, dangerous. Adrian stepped closer, his voice low and rough. "You shouldn't have come back." Evan whispered, barely breathing, "I never wanted to." Yet neither moved away. Lightning struck outside as if the universe itself refused to stay silent. The tension broke when Adrian's hand reached out, gripping Evan's wrist, gentle but possessive. That single touch reignited everything they had buried deep within. The past, the pain, the longing, all returned in one heartbeat. And before dawn broke, the alpha heir and his forbidden Omega crossed a line that would change their lives forever. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, brushing softly against tangled sheets and skin still marked by the night before. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the silence, in the scent that clung to the air, in the ache between two hearts that were never meant to meet again. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, his breath uneven, fingers trembling as they traced the faint mark on his neck, the alpha's mark that shouldn't exist. His heart hammered in his chest, torn between the warmth still lingering on his skin and the cold realization of what he'd done. Adrian lay asleep behind him, the alpha's features calm, unguarded. A side of him no one ever saw. Evan turned to look at him one last time. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Not as a servant, not as an Omega, but as his. But the illusion shattered as fast as it had formed. Reality pressed down like a blade. Adrian was the heir to a ruthless empire. Evan was nothing more than a shadow from a forbidden past. Pulling his clothes together, Evan moved quietly, each step echoing like guilt across the marble floor. His scent filled the room, and he cursed himself for leaving traces behind. He hesitated at the door, the rain-streaked window reflecting the tears he didn't want to admit. One glance back, that was all he allowed. Then he slipped into the hallway, leaving behind the warmth, the chaos, and the alpha who would soon wake to an empty bed and a haunting scent of loss. Outside, the morning air was sharp, cleansing, almost cruel. Evan wrapped his coat tighter around himself, a strange heaviness forming low in his stomach, a whisper of something he didn't yet understand. He didn't know that with every step he took away from the mansion, he was already carrying the secret that would tie him to the alpha forever. The city had changed, but the ache in Evan's chest hadn't. Weeks had passed since that night in the mansion, the night that tore open every scar he'd buried. He had found a quiet place to hide, a tiny room above an old bakery owned by a kind old woman who never asked questions. It was the kind of place where no one looked too closely, where the sound of kneading dough and the smell of fresh bread filled the air from dawn until dusk. For Evan, anonymity was safety, and silence was survival. He tried to lose himself in routine. Each morning he swept the floor, wiped tables, and helped bake pastries. Each night, he stared out the small window, watching raindrops slide down the glass, wondering if Adrian had noticed he was gone. Probably not, he told himself. Alphas like him didn't go looking for Omegas they used and discarded. Yet, some part of him, that foolish, trembling part of his heart, wished he would. The first time it happened, Evan was washing dishes. A sudden wave of nausea hit him so hard that he barely made it to the sink before he retched. His hands shook as he leaned against the counter, trying to steady his breath. Maybe it's the smell of yeast, he whispered to himself. But the next morning, and the morning after that, the sickness came again. Sharper, earlier, relentless. He tried to ignore it, to pretend it was just exhaustion or stress or nerves. But his body kept reminding him, whispering the truth he didn't want to face. When his monthly cycle didn't come, his world stopped moving. He sat alone on his bed that night, the sound of rain outside matching the rhythm of his heart. His hands pressed against his stomach, his fingers trembling. No, can't be. He remembered the storm, the heat of Adrian's skin, the way his name had left the Alpha's lips like a prayer and a curse all at once. That night was supposed to be buried, forgotten. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with him. Tears blurred his vision as the truth settled in, heavy and unshakable. He wasn't alone anymore. For hours, Evan couldn't move. The thought of carrying Adrian's child was both terrifying and heartbreakingly beautiful. A part of him wanted to smile, to imagine tiny hands, soft laughter, the warmth of a life untouched by cruelty. But reality crashed in like a blade. Adrian was the heir to the most feared mafia family in the city. His world was filled with blood, danger, and control. If he ever found out about this child, he'd claim it. He'd claim him. And Evan knew what that meant, losing his freedom, maybe even his life. He lit a single candle on the bedside table, the flame flickering weakly in the darkness. His reflection danced in the mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling. "You're all I have now," he whispered, looking down at his stomach. "I'll protect you, no matter what it takes." His voice cracked at the end, but he meant every word. The next morning, Evan made his decision. He sold the few things he had, an old watch, a worn jacket, and used the money to buy a train ticket out of the city. As the train moved through the rain-drenched countryside, Evan pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the gray sky blur into the horizon. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving. In his heart, fear warred with love. Every heartbeat reminded him of the life growing inside him. A secret born from one night of forbidden desire, now the only piece of the Alpha he couldn't let go of. He wrapped his arms around himself, whispering into the hum of the moving train. "You were never supposed to exist, but you're everything I have left." The countryside vanished into shadow as the train carried him farther from the city, farther from Adrian, and deeper into a future he couldn't yet see. But beneath his fear, a faint, fragile hope began to bloom. A hope that maybe, just maybe, this unspoken secret could one day become the reason he lived. And somewhere far behind him, in the mansion still echoing with memories of that stormy night, the Alpha heir woke from uneasy dreams, sensing something or someone had been taken from him. The bond they thought was broken had only just begun to stir. The morning sun rose over the city, but inside the Adrian family mansion, shadows still ruled. The Alpha heir stood at the edge of his room, eyes locked on the untouched side of his bed, the one that smelled faintly of rain, tears, and something softer someone. It had been days since that night, but the scent lingered like a ghost that refused to fade. Adrian hadn't slept properly since. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw him, Evan, the quiet Omega who once served in his house, the one who had disappeared years ago only to return for one fleeting, forbidden night. He'd woken to an empty bed, the sheets still warm, and for a moment he thought it was just a dream. But the faint mark on Evan's wrist where he had held him told a different story. He tried to focus on work, on meetings, on controlling the empire that his father had left behind. But nothing helped. His instincts were louder than his reason. Restless, feral, and impossible to silence. Something deep inside him screamed that a part of him was missing. The house felt hollow. Even the air tasted wrong. At first, Adrian told himself it was nothing, just guilt or frustration. But by the third night, he couldn't breathe. His alpha instincts, the ones he'd spent years suppressing, clawed at him with a vengeance. His chest burned every time he caught that fading scent, as though his body itself knew something he refused to admit. His Omega was gone. He tore through his office drawers, searching for any trace. An address, a clue, anything. Where did he go? He muttered, voice low but sharp. His loyal second-in-command, Marcus, hesitated before answering. Marcus. We checked the servants' quarters. No one saw him leave. No calls, no messages. Adrian. That's not possible. Marcus. Adrian. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Adrian, snarling, everyone wants to be found. Especially him. He dismissed Marcus with a glare that could kill. Then, in the silence that followed, he gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. The world outside thundered with business, crime, and power. But inside, Adrian's world had narrowed down to one truth. He'd lost something he didn't even know he needed until it was gone. That night, he went back to the room, their room. The faint smell of vanilla and rainwater still lingered on the pillow. He sat there in the dim light, jaw clenched, heart heavy. Why did you run? He whispered to the empty room. What are you hiding from me? His instincts pulsed again. Stronger this time, almost painful. It wasn't just longing. It was bond recognition. His inner alpha was awake now, and there was no turning it off. Somewhere, his Omega was out there. Scared. Alone. Carrying something that belonged to him, though he didn't yet know what. By dawn, the mansion's gates opened. Black cars rolled out one after another as Adrian began his search. His network spread through the city like wildfire, from underground contacts to high-end surveillance. He called in every favor, paid every informant. Find him, he ordered. No matter where he is, no matter who's hiding him. Bring him to me. Days turned into weeks. Clues were scarce, but his determination only grew sharper. He could feel Evan's absence like a wound that refused to close. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd jolt awake, heart pounding, feeling a phantom pull, like an invisible thread tugging at his chest. He followed it through dreams, through scents on strangers, through every whisper of rain. One evening, as lightning flashed across the skyline, Adrian stood at his office window overlooking the city. His reflection stared back. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, a man caught between control and madness. He lifted a glass of whiskey but didn't drink. Adrian, softly, you can run, Evan, but you're still mine. He set the glass down and turned away from the window, his decision made. The hunt had begun, and Adrian was not the kind of alpha who ever stopped once he caught the scent of what was his. Somewhere, far beyond the city lights, an Omega sat quietly by a small fire, hand resting protectively over his belly. He shivered as a cold wind passed, unaware that miles away, the alpha who had marked his soul had just begun his search, guided not by logic, but by instinct, fate, and a bond that refused to die. The train carried Evan for hours before the city disappeared behind mist and fields. When it finally stopped, the air smelled of salt and seaweed, the scent of the ocean. He had reached a small coastal town, a place so quiet it felt forgotten by the rest of the world. The locals called it Kale's Bay, a fishing village where life moved with the tides and no one asked about the past. He rented a tiny cottage near the cliffs, 2 rooms, creaking floors, and a view of the endless sea. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. He found work at a small cafe that faced the harbor, serving tea and pastries to fishermen and travelers who rarely stayed longer than a day. Every morning he'd walk to work wrapped in a shawl, the ocean wind tangling his hair, one hand instinctively resting on his stomach, a habit that had grown stronger with every passing week. The sickness had lessened now. In its place came a fragile calm, and with it, the first signs of life stirring within him. Sometimes at night, he'd lie awake listening to the waves crash against the rocks and whisper softly, "You're safe here? No one will find us." The baby was his secret, his light, the only thing that gave him strength when the memories tried to drag him back. But peace is a fragile thing, and fate, cruel as ever, never lets it last. It started one afternoon while Evan was sweeping outside the cafe. He looked up to see a sleek black car parked at the far end of the road. Its windows were tinted, its engine still running. A chill crawled up his spine. No one in Kale's Bay drove cars like that. The villagers mostly used old scooters or small vans for deliveries. That car didn't belong here. He told himself it was nothing. A traveler, maybe. But the next day it appeared again. Parked in the same spot, facing his cottage. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept checking the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek outside. The car was gone. But the unease wasn't. His instincts, sharpened by fear, told him the world he had escaped was slowly closing in. The following morning he noticed something worse. A man sitting by the cafe window, tall, dark jacket, face hidden behind sunglasses. He wasn't a villager. He didn't speak to anyone. He just sat there, watching. When Evan served him tea, their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and something inside him froze. The man's scent. It was faint, but unmistakable. He'd smelled it before, years ago, one of Adrian's men. He nearly dropped the tray. "Are you all right?" asked Mrs. Hale, the cafe owner, her voice breaking his trance. "Yes, just dizzy," Evan murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He finished his shift early and hurried home, locking every window and door. His hands shook as he packed a small bag again. Clothes, a few savings, a small wooden rattle he'd carved for the baby. He knew what this meant. Adrian's people were searching. They'd found his trail. He sank to the floor beside the bed, pressing his palm against the gentle curve of his stomach. "I promised I'd protect you," he whispered, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I can't let him find us, not yet." The wind outside howled, rattling the windows as if warning him to run. He didn't know how much longer he had, a day, maybe two, before Adrian's men came knocking. He thought about how strong the Alpha was, how easily he could take back everything Evan had tried to protect. A single command from him could destroy this fragile world. When the clock struck midnight, Evan stood and grabbed his coat. He couldn't stay. He had to disappear again, further this time. Somewhere even the sea couldn't whisper his name. But as he opened the door, his breath caught. Headlights glared from the road below, cutting through the fog. 2 black cars, engines humming. The same ones he'd seen before. Evan froze. His heart pounded so loud he could barely hear the rain starting to fall. The door creaked behind him as he whispered, "He found me." The cars didn't move closer yet. They just waited, silent and patient, like predators watching their prey. And somewhere inside one of those cars, perhaps, was a man with storm-gray eyes and a voice that still haunted his dreams. Adrian was close. Too close. Evan took one last look at the sea. Endless, wild, and cold, before slipping out the back door into the darkness. The wind swallowed his footsteps as he vanished into the night, clutching his stomach, running not just for his life, but for the tiny heartbeat that tied him forever to the Alpha who was hunting him. The world inside Adrian Voss's mansion had changed. The air was heavy, filled with tension so thick that even his most loyal men avoided meeting his gaze. For days, he hadn't spoken more than a few words. His meals went untouched. His office was in chaos. Papers scattered, glasses shattered, whiskey staining the floor like dried blood. But the silence finally broke when Marcus, his second in command, entered with trembling hands and a pale face. "Marcus, we found something." Adrian, "Talk." Marcus, "A trail, sir. Someone matching the Omega's description bought a train ticket under a false name. We traced him as far as the coast. But then, nothing." Adrian's jaw clenched, the muscles in his arms tightened, and his fingers curled into fists so hard that the veins stood out against his skin. The word Omega made his blood boil. His Omega, gone, lost, stolen from his world. Adrian low, cold, "You're telling me he vanished?" "Marcus, we're still searching." Adrian, snarling, "Not fast enough." The sound of glass breaking shattered the silence. Adrian had thrown his whiskey glass against the wall, the shards scattering like fragments of his sanity. The Alpha's control, the cold, ruthless composure that made him feared across the city, was slipping. The bond inside him burned like fire. It was primal, relentless, demanding. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Since the night Evan had vanished, Adrian had felt it. A void, deep in his chest. Some nights, he woke up choking, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Other nights, he caught a phantom scent. Rain, vanilla, soft Omega warmth, and his pulse would spike with wild desperation. His instincts whispered one truth. His mate was in danger. But Adrian wasn't the kind of man who begged. He hunted. He called his men together in the great hall, the one his father once used for gatherings of war. The chandelier flickered above, reflecting the cold glint in Adrian's eyes. Adrian, listen carefully. He's out there, somewhere near the coast or beyond. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care who gets in your way. You find him. You search every train station, every small town, every port. Bring me a name, a face, a whisper, anything. Marcus. And if someone's hiding him, Adrian, then burn their world down. No one dared to speak after that. His voice carried the kind of fury that made even killers tremble. When everyone left, Adrian sank into his leather chair, his breathing heavy. For a moment, he pressed a hand over his chest. It wasn't just anger. It was pain, sharp and raw. Why did you leave, Evan? He thought. What are you running from? He turned his chair toward the window. The city lights stretched below, glowing against the night sky, but they brought him no comfort. He was surrounded by power, wealth, and fear. Yet none of it mattered. Not when the one thing he wanted most had slipped through his fingers. He poured another drink, but his hand trembled as he brought it to his lips. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, the ruthless alpha who could command armies, now undone by the loss of one fragile Omega. A knock broke the silence. Marcus entered again cautiously. Marcus, sir, if I may, why go this far? He's just... Adrian, interrupting, eyes blazing, he's mine. The words echoed through the room like thunder. Possessive. Final. Marcus bowed his head and left quietly. Adrian stood, pacing to the large map on the wall. His eyes roamed over the markings, the routes they'd traced. His instincts tugged him toward the coast. A faint pull, primal and unexplainable. He pressed his finger against the map, over a small fishing village he didn't even recognize. His pulse quickened. Something inside him knew. He whispered under his breath, voice like a promise and a curse all at once. You can run to the edge of the world, Evan, but I'll find you. And when I do... His eyes darkened, the alpha inside fully awake now, fierce and unrestrained. I won't let you go again. Outside, the rain began to fall, mirroring the night they first crossed the line. And as thunder rolled across the city, Adrian's hunt for his lost Omega, for his mate, his obsession, his secret truly began. The coastal town was alive that afternoon, the salty air thick with chatter, fishmongers calling out prices, and the rhythmic crash of waves in the distance. Evan kept his hood low, his heart racing as he walked through the crowded marketplace. His belly had begun to round ever so slightly, hidden beneath the loose folds of his coat. He had grown used to blending in, to being invisible among strangers. But today, something in the air felt different. He told himself it was just nerves, that the chill in the breeze was nothing more than the sea's temper. Yet, when he reached for a basket of fruit, his fingers froze midair. A scent, deep, commanding, achingly familiar, sliced through the noise like lightning through fog. Cedarwood, smoke, power. His breath caught. The world seemed to narrow to that scent alone. Evan's heart thundered painfully against his ribs. No, it can't be. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the market, faces blending into one another until they stopped on him. Across the crowd, Adrian stood still, towering and dangerous in a black coat, eyes locked on him with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade to nothing. For weeks, Adrian had followed faint traces, whispers of a runaway Omega, old records from servants who had dared to lie for him, and a lingering scent he couldn't forget. His instincts had screamed that Evan was alive. But seeing him now, fragile, trembling, eyes wide with fear, was like being struck by a storm all over again. For a moment, neither moved. The space between them pulsed with memories. Of a night that changed everything, of betrayal, of longing. The crowd flowed between them like waves, but their connection didn't break. Adrian stepped forward, slow and deliberate, eyes dark with fury and something softer beneath it, something he refused to name. Evan backed away, clutching his basket, his pulse wild. He wanted to run, but his body refused to obey. His knees weakened when Adrian whispered his name across the distance. Not loud, but enough for the Omega to hear. Evan. That one word shattered his fragile calm. The Alpha's voice carried pain, relief, and a dangerous promise. The noise around them disappeared. It was just the two of them again. Alpha and Omega, predator and prey, bound by something neither could erase. Evan turned and ran, the sound of his hurried steps drowned by the sea wind. Adrian followed, pushing through the crowd, his instincts roaring to reclaim what was his. The chase had begun, not for power or revenge, but for the truth that had been hidden far too long. And as Evan disappeared into the alleyways of the market, one trembling hand pressed to his stomach, the unspoken fear rose again. If Adrian finds out about the child, nothing will ever be the same. The night had fallen quietly over the coastal village, the chaos of the marketplace long behind them. Evan had fled through narrow alleys, the damp cobblestones slick under his shoes. Every shadow seemed to whisper danger, every sound amplified in his racing heart. And yet, the Alpha's presence followed, relentless, inevitable, a force he could not escape. He rounded a corner and found himself trapped at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the dark, restless ocean. Waves crashed below, white foam glinting in the moonlight. He pressed his back against the stone wall, clutching his coat over his stomach, breath shaking. The child he carried was still small, but the weight of this secret of life growing inside him felt monumental. Footsteps echoed against the stone, deliberate and measured. Evan's heart froze. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Evan. Adrian's voice was low, husky, carrying a dangerous mix of fury and something softer, something like relief. The Alpha stepped into the moonlight, his coat flaring slightly in the night breeze, eyes locked on the Omega. The moment was electric. Fear, longing, and an undeniable bond rippled between them. Evan tried to hide, shrinking back, but Adrian's gaze was too strong, too precise. Every instinct in the Alpha screamed possession, protection, and desperation. Slowly, Adrian reached out, his large hand trembling slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from Evan's face. The touch was gentle, nothing like the rough dominance he usually displayed. Tender, almost reverent. Evan swallowed hard, chest tight. His knees threatened to give way, but the Alpha's hand rested there, grounding him. Then, almost instinctively, Adrian's gaze dropped to his hands, to the small, protective gesture over Evan's belly. "You're carrying mine?" Adrian breathed, voice low, rough with disbelief and something dangerously close to awe. His hand hovered for a moment before he dared to reach out, fingertips brushing against the curve of Evan's stomach. The touch was soft, almost reverent, but it carried an undeniable claim. Evan flinched slightly but did not pull away. The world seemed to shrink around them. The wind, the waves, the moonlight, all faded until there was only this intimate, terrifying, and profound connection. The child inside Evan was more than a secret. It was a tangible bond between them, undeniable and unbreakable. Adrian's thumb traced a small, soothing circle over the Omega's coat, his eyes never leaving Evan's. "I should have known," he whispered. "Even if you ran, even if you hid, this bond would always lead me to you." Evan's lips trembled. Fear warred with relief, panic with longing. I didn't know what else to do," he confessed, voice barely audible over the crashing waves. I couldn't let you take me, or the baby." Adrian stepped closer, the heat of his body pressing gently against Evan's. Not in aggression, but in protection. "No one will touch you," No one will ever harm you, not while I'm here. Not while I can breathe. For the first time since that night in the mansion, Evan felt a tremor of hope. The Alpha's rage had softened into something else. A vow, a promise, and a quiet reverence for the life growing inside him. And beneath the moonlight, with the waves crashing below and the wind tangling their hair, the impossible became possible. Two hearts, bound by destiny and desire, standing together in a truth they could no longer deny. Evan rested his hands over Adrian's, feeling the warmth and strength of the Alpha. And as their eyes locked, the silent acknowledgement passed between them. Nothing would ever be the same. Not ever. The moon had barely risen when Adrian finally led Evan to a secluded cottage at the edge of the cliffs. The Alpha's presence was overwhelming, his shadow long against the wooden walls. Yet, despite the comfort he offered, Evan's body remained tense, his mind racing with memories he could never erase. "Here, you'll be safe," Adrian said, his voice low but firm, placing a protective hand on the Omega's shoulder. "No one will find you. No one will hurt you. Not while I'm here." Evan flinched, drawing back instinctively. I can't go back," he whispered, his eyes glinting with tears. "I can't live like that again. Under your world, under your control. I won't let anyone, even you, decide what happens to me or to the baby." Adrian's jaw tightened, but his touch softened. "This isn't about control. I'm not asking. I'm offering protection. Everything you feared, I'll shield you from it." Evan shook his head, pressing a trembling hand against his stomach. "It doesn't matter. You don't understand what it's like to be hunted, to be used, to be helpless. I won't let my child grow up in that world." The Alpha's eyes darkened with unspoken anger, but beneath it lay worry, desperation, and something more, an unyielding need to protect what was his. Adrian reached out, but Evan pulled away. The distance between them felt insurmountable, a chasm carved by fear, pain, and mistrust. "I can't," Evan whispered, voice cracking. "Not yet. I need to do this on my own." Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the only sound the crashing waves below the cliffs. His instincts screamed to claim, to take, to force the Omega to safety. But Evan's words, fragile, desperate, pierced something inside him. Finally, Adrian stepped back, though his eyes never left Evan. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low, dangerous. "But I won't fight you, not yet. Just don't forget. I'm coming for you, and no one, nothing, will stop me." Evan swallowed hard, unable to meet the intensity of those storm-gray eyes. The bond between them had not broken, but for the first time, it felt fragile, like a chain that had been stretched too thin, waiting to snap. The quiet of Kale's Bay was deceptive. Beneath the gentle waves, behind the serene streets, danger lurked, unseen, waiting, and patient. Adrian's warning had been clear. The moment the Omega stepped into hiding, enemies would follow. And he was right. Evan had barely begun to settle into a routine when the first signs appeared. Strange faces lingered at the edges of the village, black cars idling at odd hours, whispers carried on the wind. At first, Evan tried to convince himself it was paranoia, that the village's slow pace made every shadow seem threatening. But instinct told him otherwise. One evening, he returned from the market to find the door to his cottage slightly ajar. Panic surged through him, fingers tightening around the shawl covering his belly. He stepped inside slowly. Nothing was stolen, nothing disturbed, except a note left carelessly on the table. "We know you're hiding something. Hand it over, or your little secret will die with you." Evan's blood ran cold. His hand instinctively went to his stomach. The child, the unspoken secret he had sworn to protect, had already drawn attention. Meanwhile, Adrian's men had traced the movements of another powerful mafia family. The Demore Syndicate, rivals who had long coveted his territory and influence. And now, they had discovered what Adrian had not even fully revealed. The unborn child, an heir tied to Adrian's bloodline, a weapon and leverage in their hands. Evan sank to the floor, trembling, trying to figure out what to do. Every instinct screamed to run further, but there was nowhere left to hide. And somewhere in the shadows, the enemy waited. Clever, ruthless, and patient, ready to exploit fear, betrayal, and weakness. At the same time, Adrian was miles away, gathering information, piecing together the trail. His rage had shifted, from the frustration of losing Evan to the wrath of knowing enemies were now involved. He clenched his fists as he stared at the map spread before him. "You touch him, and you'll answer to me," Adrian growled. "No one threatens what's mine. No one. Not you, not anyone." The Alpha's words were a promise, and the storm brewing between rival mafias and his lost Omega was about to erupt. Evan's secret and his child were now the center of a dangerous game where every choice could mean life or death. The night sky was painted blood red, the full moon hanging low over the cliffs like a warning. Its light bathed the coastal village in an eerie glow, shadows stretching long and sharp. Evan had been hiding in the abandoned warehouse near the docks, clutching his belly, every muscle in his body taut with fear. The Demore Syndicate had found him, and they weren't planning to leave him alive. Footsteps echoed across the wooden floorboards. Heavy boots, measured and purposeful. Evan's breath caught. He pressed himself against the cold wall, heart hammering, imagining the worst. A voice called out, deep and mocking, "We know you're here, Omega. Come out, and maybe we'll be merciful." Evan shook his head, tears blinding him. He couldn't run anymore. Not like this. Not with the child inside him. Then a shadow moved across the moonlight, faster than any human should have been able to move. Adrian. His coat flared behind him like the wings of a storm, eyes glowing with lethal intensity. The Alpha's instincts had led him here, through the mist, the chaos, and the danger, to the one thing he couldn't lose. "Get your hands off him!" Adrian's voice roared like thunder, echoing against the warehouses. The syndicate members froze, momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity radiating from him. But then they attacked, knives flashing, guns raised. Adrian moved like a storm unleashed, every strike precise, every motion controlled, every step deadly. He was a predator defending what was his. Evan watched in awe and fear. The Alpha fought like a force of nature, throwing men aside, deflecting bullets, catching knives barehanded. And when one of them lunged at Evan, Adrian was there in an instant, sweeping him into his arms. Evan's breath caught, pressed against the Alpha's chest, feeling the unyielding strength that had always scared and mesmerized him. "I've got you. You're safe now," Adrian growled, his lips brushing Evan's temple as he adjusted the Omega in his arms. Evan's hands trembled as they rested over his stomach, feeling the tiny, fragile heartbeat of the life growing inside him. The moonlight caught in Adrian's eyes, revealing a mixture of fury, relief, and something softer. Awe at the life he had never imagined protecting so fiercely. The fight continued around them, but the Alpha's focus was singular. Nothing could touch Evan. Not tonight, not ever. With calculated strength, Adrian incapacitated the last of the syndicate members, leaving them unconscious on the wet wooden floor. Finally, silence fell, broken only by the crashing waves and the ragged breathing of the two of them. Adrian set Evan down gently, hands lingering on his shoulders, searching his eyes for any sign of injury. "You're safe for now. I swear it. No one will ever touch you again," he whispered. Evan leaned into him, tears streaming freely, exhaustion and fear melting into relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt a fragile peace, and the Alpha's warmth surrounding him was more than comfort. It was a promise. Outside, the blood-red moon reflected in the water, casting its glow over the scene of chaos and survival. Inside, an Omega and an Alpha stood together, unbroken, bound by danger, desire, and a secret life that neither would ever let go. "I'm not leaving you again," Adrian murmured, voice rough with emotion. "You and our child, you're mine." Evan pressed his forehead against the Alpha's chest, finally letting himself believe it. Tonight, the Alpha had risked everything, fought everyone, and come for them. And in that moment, with the waves crashing beneath the cliffs, the impossible. Their survival, their bond, and the life they shared felt painfully, achingly real. The small safe house was nothing like the mansion, nor the chaos of the docks. Tucked away in a dense forest beyond the cliffs, it smelled of pine, damp earth, and the faint warmth of the ocean carried in on the wind. Evan stepped inside cautiously, every muscle still tense from the night's terror. The Alpha had carried him here, shielded him, and fought off men who would have killed them both without hesitation. But now, surrounded by silence, he felt the weight of what came next. Living with Adrian, trapped together, forced to confront what neither could deny. Adrian set him down gently, his large hands lingering over Evan's shoulders. The Alpha's presence was overwhelming. A storm contained within a human form, power and desire vibrating from every inch of him. Evan swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the floor, then to the Alpha's intense gaze. "You're safe here," Adrian said softly, his voice like a promise. "No one can touch you. No one will find you. Not while I'm here." Evan's hands instinctively moved to his stomach, protective and tender. I know," he whispered. "But it's not just the syndicate. I can't go back to your world. I can't." Adrian stepped closer, closing the space between them, heat radiating from his body. "This isn't about control," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "It's about protection, about keeping you and our child alive. I'll never force you, but I will never let you go again." Evan looked up, meeting those storm-gray eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of the bond between them. Unbroken, insistent, undeniable. Memories of the mansion, the stolen nights, and the night of the child's conception flooded back, and with them, a warmth he had tried to bury. The days in the safe house passed in a fragile rhythm. Adrian never left his side, but he gave Evan space, never crossing the line. His alpha instincts tempered by respect and something softer, awe at the life Evan carried. Meals were cooked together, quiet conversations shared, and each night, Evan would fall asleep to the sound of the Alpha's steady breathing beside him, a tether that was both comforting and suffocating. And yet, as they spent time together, old feelings resurfaced. The tension, the longing, the unspoken desire that had haunted them both since that stormy night. A brush of a hand across the kitchen counter, a glance that lingered too long, the heat of Adrian's body when he leaned close to check on the baby. It all fanned the embers of something more than survival. One evening, as the forest whispered outside and the moonlight spilled across the small wooden floors, Adrian sat close to Evan. His hand found the Omegas, fingers intertwining with delicate insistence. "You're mine," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind Evan's ear. "And this child ours. Nothing will change that." Evan's chest tightened, and a tremor ran through him. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared of you, scared of everything." Adrian cupped his face, thumb brushing over his lips. "You don't have to be. Not here. Not with me." In the safe house, far from the world that had hunted them, the bond between Alpha and Omega deepened. Old wounds began to heal and new ones were born, but these were the ones they chose to keep. Desire, protection, and the fragile beginnings of trust wove between them like threads of fire and silver, binding them tighter than any chain ever could. Outside, the wind rustled through the forest, carrying the scent of salt and pine, a reminder that danger still lurked. But inside, in that small, hidden space, Adrian and Evan existed in a world of their own making. A world of safety, of stolen intimacy, and a bond that no one could ever sever. Evan pressed his forehead against the Alpha's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe not just in survival but in something more, something worth fighting for. "We'll make it," Adrian whispered, voice low and certain. "You, me, and our child. No one can take that away." And under the pale moonlight streaming through the windows, Evan finally let himself hope. The dawn broke over the safe house, casting soft light across the small wooden floors and the gentle curve of Evan's stomach. For the first time in weeks, the forest outside seemed peaceful, almost protective. But inside, a storm lingered, not of danger from the outside, but of emotions too powerful to contain. Adrian had been watching Evan all night, his eyes never leaving the Omega even as he pretended to sleep. The Alpha's storm-gray eyes softened only when he saw Evan breathe evenly, the rise and fall of his chest a rhythm that belonged only to them. But beneath that calm, a fierce determination simmered, a promise that had been forming in his heart from the moment he rescued them at the docks. Evan stirred, blinking sleepily, and Adrian moved closer, his hand brushing against the Omega's hair. "Morning," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. Evan flinched slightly, still cautious. "Morning," he replied, voice quiet, hesitant. Memories of control and danger made every Alpha's touch feel heavy, even if it was protective. Adrian shook his head, kneeling in front of Evan and carefully placing his hands over the curve of his belly. His touch was firm but gentle, reverent, as though he was acknowledging not only the life growing inside Evan but the bond between them. "This is yours. This child is ours," he said, voice rough with emotion. "And I swear, no one will ever touch you or our child again." Evan's eyes widened, a mix of fear, relief, and something fragile breaking through. You can't promise that," he whispered. "There are too many dangers. The Syndicate, your world, it's not safe." Adrian shook his head firmly, his storm-gray gaze locking onto Evan's. "I can promise it," he said, voice unwavering. "I've fought for you. I've risked everything for you, and I'll fight 1,000 more times if I have to. No one will hurt you, ever. Not while I breathe. Not while I'm alive." He leaned closer, resting his forehead against Evan's, letting the warmth of their shared breath fill the space between them. "You are mine, Evan, and you will never be alone again." Tears slipped down Evan's cheeks, unbidden, as the weight of fear, uncertainty, and months of running began to lift. For the first time, he let himself trust. Just a little, just enough to feel safe. Adrian pressed a kiss to his temple, soft and possessive, a seal of his vow. "We'll face everything together," he whispered. "You, me, and our child. No one will ever take you from me again." The forest outside rustled gently, the wind carrying the faint scent of salt and pine. Inside, in the quiet, hidden safe house, the Alpha's promise settled between them like fire and steel, unbreakable, eternal, and binding them together in a world they would protect with their lives. Evan rested his head against Adrian's chest, finally letting himself believe in the impossible. That they could survive, that they could be together, and that the child growing inside him would know safety, love, and the unwavering protection of a father and a mate who would fight the world for them both. The storm had returned, fierce and unrelenting, beating against the walls of the safe house as if nature itself knew the moment had come. Lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the ground, and rain pounded the roof in an endless, chaotic rhythm. Evan's breaths were ragged, sharp, and desperate, each contraction more intense than the last. His hands clutched the edge of the bed, nails digging into the sheets, his body trembling with pain and anticipation. Adrian was at his side instantly, his storm-gray eyes wide with both fear and unwavering determination. He held Evan's trembling hands in his own, grounding him with the weight of his presence. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, voice low and steady, though every muscle in his body was taut with tension. "I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you." Evan gritted his teeth, moaning through the pain. "It hurts. It hurts so much," he gasped, his voice breaking. Adrian leaned closer, brushing damp hair from Evan's face, lips grazing his temple. "I know, my Omega. I know," he whispered. "But you're strong. Our child is strong. And we're in this together. Every scream, every tear. I'm not leaving. Ever." The storm outside seemed to mimic the chaos inside the room, thunder crashing in tandem with each contraction, lightning illuminating the raw intensity of the Alpha's gaze as he never left Evan's side. Sweat mixed with rainwater from the windows, soaking their clothes, but neither cared. Their world had narrowed to a single point: Evan and the life he carried. Hours passed, each moment stretched thin by pain and fear. Evan screamed, cried, and clutched Adrian like a lifeline, while the Alpha held him close, whispering words of love, strength, and reassurance over and over, until the world outside ceased to exist. Finally, a cry cut through the storm, raw, fragile, and perfect. Adrian's eyes widened, and he turned to Evan, voice trembling with awe. It's a boy," he whispered, brushing a tear from Evan's temple as they both collapsed against each other, exhausted but alive. Evan, trembling and soaked, let himself rest against Adrian's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the Alpha's heartbeat and the tiny cries of their newborn. He's ours," Evan whispered, voice shaking but filled with wonder. Adrian pressed a kiss to Evan's hair, his other hand cradling their child carefully. "Yes," he murmured, eyes glinting with fierce protectiveness. "And I swear, no one will ever touch you. Neither of you. Ever." The storm began to calm outside, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the thunder fading into distant echoes. Inside, however, a different storm had passed, one of fear, pain, and raw emotion, leaving in its wake the warmth of life, love, and the unbreakable bond of an Alpha, his Omega, and their child. For the first time in months, the safe house was filled with quiet, the soft cries of their newborn, the steady pulse of Adrian's arms around Evan, and the unspoken promise that no matter what the world threw at them, they would face it together. "Welcome to the world," Adrian whispered to the child, voice rough and tender all at once. "You're ours, and we'll protect you with everything we are." Evan rested his head against the Alpha's chest, tears streaming freely, and for the first time, they both allowed themselves to simply breathe. Together, unafraid, and finally home. The rain had stopped by morning. The sky outside the window was pale gold, streaked with soft clouds, calm after the storm, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath in reverence for the new life within the safe house. Evan stirred, his body weak but peaceful, his head resting against Adrian's chest. The rhythmic beating of the Alpha's heart was the only sound he needed. Their newborn slept quietly beside them, wrapped in a soft blanket, tiny fingers curling and uncurling as if reaching for the world. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. He simply looked at Evan, pale and fragile but glowing with life, and at the small bundle between them. His hand trembled slightly as he traced his fingers down the baby's cheek, the softness making his throat tighten. He had faced gunfire, betrayal, and death without flinching. But this small life terrified him more than anything ever had. Evan opened his eyes slowly, catching the Alpha's expression. "You're scared," he whispered, voice hoarse from exhaustion but carrying a small smile. Adrian exhaled, his eyes glistening. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I've fought wars, but this you and him. It's the first time I'm afraid to lose something that actually matters." Evan reached up, brushing his fingers against Adrian's jaw. "Then don't lose us," he murmured softly. "Stay. Choose us." Adrian's breath hitched. For so long, he had lived in shadows, surrounded by blood and silence. He never believed he could have something this pure, something worth protecting for love, not loyalty. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to Evan's. The scent of his Omega, soft, warm, and grounding, filled his senses. "I almost lost you," he whispered. "I thought if I kept you away, you'd be safe. But I was wrong." Evan smiled faintly, his eyes shining. "You don't have to be perfect, Adrian. You just have to be here." There was a long silence. Then Adrian's hand moved to cradle both of them, his Omega and their child. His voice dropped to a low, trembling murmur, carrying years of unspoken emotion. "You're mine," he whispered, each word slow and reverent. "Both of you." The words hung in the air, not as a claim of control, but as a vow. A promise carved from devotion and pain. His Alpha aura softened, wrapping around them protectively, like invisible wings. Evan closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. But this time they were warm, not bitter. "We've always been yours," he breathed. "You just had to see it." Adrian pressed a kiss to Evan's forehead, lingering there. Then, with a faint, almost disbelieving smile, he looked at their sleeping son. "He's got your nose," he said quietly. Evan laughed softly, the sound small, fragile, but alive. "And your temper, I bet." Adrian chuckled, his chest rumbling under Evan's hand. "Then the world better prepare itself." The morning light spilled across the bed, golden and gentle. Outside, the garden swayed in the wind. Inside, for the first time in a lifetime of chaos, there was peace. Adrian, the once feared alpha, held his family close. No longer a man haunted by blood and power, but one reborn by love. He whispered again, this time not as a vow, but as a truth he finally believed in. "My Omega, my son, my home." And as the day broke fully, the alpha who had once belonged to darkness finally stepped